Convenience stores are known for snacks, and people love finding new items in convenience stores, and there's a connection there. Today, we're going to talk about that connection with a guy who's also in the news because of Stranger Things. So joining us today is Jason Liebig. He was a speaker at the 2025 NACS Leadership Forum. He is also the guy that is called the Indiana Jones of snacks. We're going to dive into that a little bit, but what that means is he's the guy that gets a lot of brands on TV and elsewhere, and we'll talk about what that means. So thanks for joining us today, Jason.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to get into it.
So how did this start? You know, being called the Indiana Jones of snacks. I probably should set this up. One of the ways that you're in the news now is the new episodes of Stranger Things came out the day before Thanksgiving. More come out the day before Christmas. And of course, one of the classic iconic things from season 1 is the Eggo box. Lego my Eggos if you're of a certain age. And that was you. You were the one that somebody said, we don't have that. I bet a guy does. So you want to talk about just how Stranger Things gave you a little bit more cred, and then some of the other things you're doing now in the news, and then we'll talk about what it all means for snack brands.
Yeah, I mean, well, we can get into my origin story, but I can tell you that the way Stranger Things found me, and they found my archives, it was as simple as this. And it's going to sound hard to believe because we live in an era where it feels like everything is on the internet. You can find everything. But with regards to the history of CPG, certainly with regards to snack brands and candy brands, you can't find everything. And a lot of the stuff you can find now is because of the last 20 years of my work, because 20 years ago when I started, you could find about this much. There were just a few hundred things online, fully. And in the 20 years since, I've published probably around 20,000 of those things. So when Stranger Things, when the art department or prop department, I assume, started looking, they said, we need a 1980s Eggo box for this show because it's a big plot point. There was literally one image of a 1980s Eggo waffle box on the internet. It was mine that I had shared on my old Flickr page. This is the actual box. This is the back of it. And I'm going to jump right to the Easter egg. So scans of this were used by the art department to recreate this box very smartly. They recreated all the props exactly from this box. The thing they screwed up on, and this is an Easter egg if you want to go back and watch, this is a little inside info. Well played, Jeff. This is an Easter Eggo, a little bit inside baseball. But the woman who originally saved this box, who I purchased it from, she was what we used to call a refunder. And so this is a little bit of background. Refunders used to save packaging. And starting in the 60s, they would save box tops, but then the companies were like, well, listen, all these people are saving box tops. We have to ask for different parts of the box now. We'll ask for part of the logo. We'll ask for, when they came out with UPC codes, we'll ask for the UPC or proof of purchase seals or some other thing. So refunders started sharing newsletters, and they started sharing whole boxes. And so people like me, collectors, what have you, historians, would occasionally find refunders who hadn't tossed their stash. And get this, in this particular case, this refunder had cut the proof of purchase seal off of the box, but she didn't cut all the way through the box. So there was just the white cardboard exposed. She took a razor and then peeled it off. But when the Stranger Things art department reproduced this for season 1, they did not fix this. So if you watch very carefully, when Eleven is carrying around those Eggo waffles boxes in season 1, each one will have a strange errant white square on it that doesn't belong. And that's my Easter Eggo. No, I mean, honestly, it drove me nuts the first time I saw it. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. That's like my signature now. For the rest of time, I can point to Stranger Things and I can say, no, that's what makes it mine. And so, so I kind of like that.
You use the phrase origin story. That tells me that you have a bit of a background around superheroes or comics. Was that the connection to snacks?
In a roundabout way, it was. My career started in New York 31 years ago. I came out of here after college. I grew up in Nebraska, came to New York City because I wanted to work in the comic book business. I worked briefly in marketing for DC Comics and Warner Brothers. And then 6 months after I left DC, I worked in the creative editorial department of Marvel Comics. And I worked on the X-Men. It was a very exciting time to work on the X-Men. We were the best-selling comic books in the world. Not because of me. I always tell people, it's like I came onto the 3rd season of Friends. They were already doing very well when I showed up. I just had to keep that very fast-moving train on the tracks and try to keep it going as fast as it was going. But during that time, I did not have a design background or an education. During those years at Marvel Comics, I gained an informal design education. I would sit in the Marvel bullpen as my cover guy, typically this guy named Johnny Green. He was a great guy. He's still around. We're friends on LinkedIn, but he's since moved on. But he would teach me about the sort of terminology of why we laid out a cover a certain way. They would be putting the trade dress on the cover, the logo. We would talk about terms like negative space, which as a business guy I'd never heard of before. And so I learned about these terms. I learned about printing terms, things like trapping, CYMK. I had this great education at Marvel, which was beyond anything I could have expected. So when I left Marvel Comics, I had gained this real love of design. And to jump to the story, 2 years later, I found myself in a bookstore in Boston, Massachusetts. I was hanging out in the design section of Barnes & Noble, as I often did. And I found a book on the shelf called Crazy Kids Food, written by Dan Goodsell and Steve Roden, Dan, who's now a very good friend of mine. And it was all about kids' food packaging from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I thought to myself, and this is where it all happened, I thought to myself, ooh, I'd like to have three pieces of packaging from when I was a kid. It never occurred to me you could go out and collect it. So I said, I just want a Super Sugar Crisp cereal box, a Hot Tamales candy box, and a Marathon bar wrapper. And I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna get those, put them on a shelf, and won't that be great? And if I could have just done that, and if there was already an encyclopedia of snacks and candy with pictures of everything, that probably would have been the end of the story. As it turns out, you couldn't just go onto eBay and find an old Hot Tamales box or an old Super Sugar Crisp box. If you want the first Spider-Man comic, you can go onto eBay right now and get one. If you want a Mickey Mantle rookie card, you can go onto eBay right now and get one. You just have to have a big enough checking account. Mm-hmm. But if you want a 1975 Hot Tamales box, you're gonna have to wait around a few years and hope you got lucky that one just surfaces, because the stuff is ephemeral. It was thrown away. And the other thing was, when I went online, I couldn't even see pictures of most of this stuff. So I was driven by this desire to sort of start documenting it. And so I ended up becoming the principal documentarian of the history of this material. I think I've documented more consumer packaged goods packaging on the internet than anyone, than any organization or anything. And it's given me the life and provided the strange adventures that I've had in the 20 years since.
So I think anybody sitting where I am is like, I can't believe he didn't ask that story, question. And so I'm thinking of all these hundreds of questions I could be asking.
Yeah.
Or talk about this product or that product, or where do you store it? All those things. But we're not going to have a Joe Rogan 3-hour podcast. We're going to try to keep it semi-reasonable.
Fair enough.
I guess let's just start out like collecting things is really not about like remember when and looking back. It's about taking what connected with people and moving a brand forward. So how do you talk about this? I know you also are on TV a lot.
Yes.
With TV series. So
yes.
How does all of this, how do you take the collection, the knowledge, the design background and talk about how brands can move forward and what are simple things they ought to do because you've seen it work and you've seen it not work?
That's a really good question. These are the kinds of subject, Jeff, that I do try to do. Initially I would say I spent a lot of time just trying to find the puzzle pieces, right? Because they simply weren't there. So for me, it was a lot of initially finding the stuff and trying to assemble it. But as I've begun to assemble these things, and I've been able to see how these things change, and I've been able to track okay, what was going on in the world, in the design world, in consumer goods at the time. They do start to reveal patterns, and you can start to see things. And then you can start to say, okay, and as I've learned, over the last 15 years, as I've learned more into what I got a degree in marketing, and going back to that and my relationships with people in CPG, I'm saying, okay, I'm learning from them. And how does my lens into all this past stuff help apply to that? And so you start to see what worked in the past. And a good friend of mine, Greg Giudotti over at Ferrera, he has this great phrase. He says, there's fruits in our roots. And I believe that's true. You can draw from the past. It's, people always say, oh, nostalgia's big. And everybody does talk about nostalgia. I mean, Stranger Things is a show built on this very heavy nostalgic, these hooks, right? There are many nostalgic hooks throughout the show. That's a big part of its success, but of course it's also well executed. So I think what you can do to try to put a finer point on the answer to your question is, when you really start to understand all these things and you can take them in a whole, you can say, what are the problems we are facing now with this brand or this distribution system or this packaging? What do we want to achieve? I think these are the basic marketing questions people should always ask, right? What problem are we trying to solve? And how did they solve it in the past? And the past reveals answers. I was dealing with, I was talking with IDEO, and they were talking about like Oreo, and I don't know that I can talk about the specifics of any of that work, but what I was able to bring to that was something I talked to people a lot about: product innovation. I said, look, sometimes you're trying to market things differently or sell things differently, and or improve a product. And I said there was a funny thing happening with a company that is now best known for being the Willy Wonka candy company. They were called Sunline. They made a product for 30 years called Lickamaid, and it was just a sugary sweet powder. It exists to this day as part of Fun Dip. If you've seen Fun Dip, you put the stick in there. On every package of Fun Dip, it still says Lickamaid, but Lickamaid was first manufactured back in the 30s. In the 1950s, the founder's son took over. A man named Menlo Smith was the son. And they had a real problem with retailers understanding that their product was a confection, that it was a candy, because it was functionally looked a lot like Kool-Aid. It was in a packet like Kool-Aid, and so it was being stocked where the Kool-Aid was often. So people were confused, and they said, well, how do we get people to understand this as a confection? And, I suppose if you're sitting in a room of marketing people, brand people, they will say, how can we do that? Can we make a big poster that shows kids eating it as a candy? Can we have a new slogan or a jingle that talks about how it's a candy and how it's sweet and all these things? And they had a brilliant idea. They said, what if, I think what happened is someone saw a brightly colored paper straw, and they said, what if we just poured that exact same product into a paper straw, pinched off the ends, and sold it that way? And that became Pixie Sticks. And Pixie Sticks allowed them to not only very clearly sell this product as a confection, but they were able to sell 10 times as much of it. And so I always bring up that story because I said, look, when you're scrambling your brains trying to figure out how to get through to people, I go, sometimes all you need to do is change the delivery system. And that story is a great example of just changing the delivery system of the exact same product. It's literally the exact same product. It's just a slightly tweaked delivery system, and it made all the difference. And so, it's a great, I always say sometimes the best lesson are the fundamentals of baseball. And so I will tell people, listen, think about that the next time you're facing a challenge. Is there some simple tweak that's so obvious that you're just not even looking at it, that you're too close? And so I think sometimes that can be helpful. And of course, look, the regular design things that we always look at, which are, is it speaking to the consumer? Is it meeting them where they are then? Because consumers change, and so I will, without getting into the exact examples, I will tell stories about brand innovations that worked really well when they were introduced because consumers were in a very specific mindset at the time. And that if you tried to sell them with the same product now, if it was brand new, it would fail because they were at a different time. I think we just went through that with COVID, where products launched during COVID because we were all stuck at home. Some things just blew up, and they would not have blown up in the same way if they launched even a year or two earlier.
So the kids like to use this phrase, dupes. But let's talk about it more in private label. I think the old mindset or the traditional mindset is we want to have a product that people can immediately recognize is similar to this. So we're going to make it look as close as the lawyers will allow us to do. Is as you look at candy, snacks, grab and go food, is that mindset still the successful mindset, or are there other ways that people can look at private label, and are there one or two things that it's like you got to do this, and one or two things you can't do this?
I think, look, I do think that still exists. I think, I think going back to candy again, I think a product that was helped largely by COVID was Nerd's gummy clusters, which I know every convenience store must be selling mountains of, because everyone's selling mountains. If it's taken that $50 million Nerds brand and turned it into a $900 million a year plus brand, which is incredible. That's in 5 years. It's gotten, that's almost 1,000%. Oh no, 2,000%. Yeah, 50 to yes, almost 2,000%. Hi, podcast math.
Yes.
Live here. But that's incredible. And so when the rest of the industry sees that, they're like, oh my God, we got to get a piece of that. So you do see right now, you see a lot of copycat products. Everyone is some people are just directly trying to do the exact same thing, putting a hard, crunchy confection, pebbling on it on a gummy center. Other people are looking at that and saying, well, we don't need to copycat that, but what is it about that that's interesting? And if you look at the gummy category in 2020 was a very mature category. It had been well sold in this country since the late 80s. Really not so much before. It was not a very big category here before that. But so people were now looking at that and saying, okay, we sort of just rested on our laurels. Gummies were sort of sold one way, but now this idea of multi-textural, people seem to really respond to multi-textural. They took that lesson, which I think is a good lesson to take from Nerd's gummy clusters. It was also clean, things weren't falling off of it, it was easy to pop, and it was very addictive. So people were saying, well, we don't have to copycat that exactly, but maybe we can innovate within that as well. And that's sort of taking inspiration from what someone else is doing and then saying, okay, I'm going to take these ideas, this sort of thematic, I'm going to say, maybe I can take that and apply it to something that is then truly innovative on our part. And so I think within private label, which I'm glad you brought up because I really love private label, especially nowadays. Because private label, again, maybe I'm repeating what we've just talked about. Private label, to me in the past, was literally just low-cost versions of brand products. And now it's a huge business. I just saw an article that Aldi is going to become like the third largest retailer in America or something, known for their private label. When I'm down in Texas, I love going into H-E-B stores. And certainly, look, I mean, I'm a big, anytime I can find like a local convenience store, I stop on the interstate all the time. I love when people have exclusive things that are only to them. They'll have crazy chip flavors that you can't get at a Target or a Walmart, and you're only finding them at like 7-Eleven or whatever, whatever chain of convenience stores you're close to. And I just think that's a big important thing. And it's also, because we are consumers, we're so much more experientially desiring snackers. It's become such a big part of our affiliation and our relationship to brands that we want to experience more. We're driven by social media more. I do believe our snacking part of our lives has gone, I've always said this, and I've been saying this for almost 20 years, so it sounds very tired in my head, but look, snacks used to be a meal replacement, not a great one, but a meal replacement, a reward, a treat, a bribe, and I still think they serve all those functions, an indulgence, but now I think they're also moving into a legit part of our entertainment package, where it's just like, I want to be entertained by these things. And so it's like, I'll go out and try something I've never tried before, and that's entertaining. I will share my experience online, or I will relate to the experience I've seen online. And so I think there's a lot of that happening as well.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You said it better. My thing was, it has to make you smile. It has to be fun.
Yes.
And particularly you talk about GLP-1 today, where one out
Oh my
of
gosh, yes.
8 Americans have tried one of those
Wow.
GLP-1s.
Wow.
So you may not be eating as much, but that doesn't mean that you don't want some interesting flavors, and just smile
Yes.
and just grab
Yes.
something. And a lot of times you'll hear about how important snacking is just on the road, because
Yeah.
there's nothing else going on besides watching the miles count off, or if
Right.
you're commuting. So
Yes.
it just gives you something to do, as long as you're not like throwing them down like, say, Homer Simpson or something like that.
Right. No, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've often said, it's when you think about aspirational ways to live, people talk about, oh, I want to travel. I want to eat great food. I want to have these kinds of experiences. And I said, look, you walk in, like if you're on the road and you stop at a convenience store, you're getting a version of all of that, right? And if you're me, for me, it's never a grind. It's always just like, oh, let's get into it. Like, oh, I'm here to Maverick. I've never been in a Maverick before. Okay, let's see what they got. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get this. I'm going to try that. I'm going to get this. And for me, it is really part of a huge part of my entertainment. But I know for everybody it is, because that's the products they're stocking now, and those are the things they're trying to do. Because if they can give you that, I talk a lot certainly about nostalgia. If you can connect with someone on that emotional level, you're going to grab them, and you're going to have a better chance of holding them, because that's what we're trying to do. And if you can touch them on an emotional level, that's 70% of the way towards selling them on whatever you're trying to sell them. And again, I talk to people in these different industries. It's like, especially in the candy business, they say, well, I'm not selling candy. I'm not selling sugar. I'm selling joy. I'm selling happiness, moments of joy. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, and just thinking, like, I don't think I've had one of those wax bottles with quarter ounce of liquid, or tenth of an ounce of liquid or whatever, and then you got to figure out what to do with that wax you just bit off. But I think anybody that's had one of those is smiling right now. It has a fond memory, even though I don't think I ever need to have another one. But it just like pulls you in. And
nickel nips.
That's okay. And so there's little things like that. When I was a kid, and it's like, boy, I wish they had them now, but who knows if I'd ever get one. So, there is that emotional tie with how do you take the best of the past and move it forward? And some of the things that you're also, whether it's advising or talking to people about, are just how do you take retro brands or move them forward? Like, Doritos, didn't they do something with Stranger Things? So taking nostalgia and moving it forward?
Yes, well, I mean, for this season of Stranger Things, Doritos was a part of that. They just put the branding on all of their product line. But they also came out with, what do they call it? It was like a split pack. It had the retro graphics, and it was like a zesty taco, which was a flavor I think they played with in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I think it was like a ranch, which was introduced in 1986, Cool Ranch, one of the greatest chips ever to be introduced, a great 1980s introduction. And so they sort of mashed them up, and so it was a great way to do that. So yes, they did it that way. Talk about brands tapping into nostalgia. I mean, Stranger Things is at its apex now. It's coming up to its conclusion, but brands have really tapped into that. Gatorade has released retro bottles, and I think you can also get now, you can't get them in store, but I think they're doing a promotion where you can buy a kit that has real glass bottles of Gatorade, and people respond powerfully to that. When you've been getting something in plastic, you can suddenly get it in glass. That takes you back. It tastes differently. The fluids don't taste the same, and it's a wild thing how all these factors factor into giving you that experience. It's not just ingredients. It can be the label, but it can also be what the bottle's made out of. And so there's lots of ways to tap into that. As Snapple just recently re-released glass bottles, but only here in New York. And when I saw them, I was like, oh, this is so great. And they sent me some over. But I was like, oh, the packaging's very contemporary. And I was like, I feel like people who are really nostalgic want to see the old packaging. But I said, maybe they're saving that. They're going to do something with that later.
Did it still make that pop when you opened it?
Yes, it did.
So it is.
The snap.
It's the smell, but it's also, it's the taste and it's the look, but there also is the sound. And sometimes the positive smells associated with that.
Yes, I mean, neuroscientists have studied this in people. They did a study where I think they had two different kinds of bourbon, and they were the same bourbon, but served one in a plain flat bottle and one in an ornate, beautiful bottle with a lovely label. And they had people wired up to their brains, and you tasted one, and their brain processed the flavors, the ingredients, which were identical, right? They were both glass bottles. But they were identical, but the brain processed the flavors differently because of what they had seen. Mm-hmm. One of the brilliant things, Frito-Lay has just released these naked Cheetos and naked Doritos, and I said, and they sent out this influencer kit to people with little glasses that have red lenses on them. So when you put side by side, because they sent out the regular and the no artificial colors version. So when you put on the glasses, you can't see the difference, right? And when you can't see, yes, you're supposed to guess. But when you can't see the difference, they do taste exactly the same. And I thought whoever was in their marketing department was brilliant, because they understood that little bit of neuroscience. Because if you can see the difference, they will taste different, because your brain won't allow you to think they're the same. And that's the tricky part. And that is, I don't want to get into the weeds of dyes and everything else, and and whether or not we should do that. I'm all for whatever we want to do to make people healthier. But I thought, when people are faced with sadder looking Skittles, like the kind you get in Europe, like I always said, I want my Skittles to be colors not found in nature. But they do taste differently to you, unless you've trained yourself to be used to that thing. When you see those bright colors, you're like, oh, it represents joy in a different way. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know it, or if you've got a blindfold on, it's different. That's why these restaurants, they do blackout restaurants, because they take away all that exterior stuff. All you are interacting with then is the texture and the flavor. And so it's interesting. But of course, we live in the real world where we get to have all these other tools. We get to deal with packaging. We get to deal with sound. We get to deal with the lighting of the store, and how things look. So, yeah.
So I'm setting up this question with,
yes,
you're not a retailer, so
yes,
this is not medical advice or anything like that. You will not be, legally bound. But
I appreciate that.
One of the things that we talk about is everybody sells the same snacks and drinks. And it's not just convenience stores, it's auto parts stores, it's Home Depot, it's pet stores. They're all selling somewhat the same drinks and beverages and food. So have you seen, or do you have any suggestions for how do people cut through the clutter in how do they merchandise? Have you gone to any stores and it's like, hey, not only is that a cool product, but I love the way they talked about it in the store. It wasn't just the price. It wasn't just slitting open a case and displaying product, and not end caps, but anything that is just like, man, those guys are smart.
It's a good question. I'm in the northeast of the country. I go to a lot of Circle K's. I go to a lot of 7-Elevens, Speedways, which are now part of 7-Eleven, of course. Although Speedways are still built differently than 7-Elevens typically. Mm-hmm. But it's I was going to say one of the things I was really hit by. I was driving cross country, and I wish I could remember. I don't even know if it was a real chain store, and it was kind of an end cap at the end of their candy aisle. But they literally had nothing but SKUs of Reese's, right? Because there's 30 different Reese's SKUs now. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God! I was like, boom! It just exploded because it's such that unified color. It strangely enough had that billboard effect that you look for in sort of when you're at Costco, right, with your packaging, which you want. But I said, just seeing all that very trademarked orange, right, that trademark Reese's orange, which they hold on to that trademark. But it had this strange billboard effect that I never see, and it never hits me in the same way when I'm in the aisle when I see 8 SKUs of Reese's or whatever, and then sometimes different Reese's are in a different section. But what I would say is, I'd say within the regular candy aisle, things, people tend to follow the same things. You've got stand-up pouches on top, bagged candy sometimes opposite, sometimes next to it. When I'm usually struck by things, it is by the freestandings and by the end caps. That's how I'm usually getting my attention. I don't know. aside from that one thing where they just unified the color. And I will say this, like, it's funny, I go back to even my comic book roots. We were always thinking about how things were going to look on the shelf. And there was a thing about a comic book cover, because you've got your big logo up here, then you've got all your action here and your art. And we understood that comic book stores, unless you were the front comic on these shelves, and because comic book stores are usually these flat shelves, not old spinner racks, but even spinner racks, if you were the first comic, yes, they could see the action. But if you weren't, they were only going to see like this much of the cover. So what can you do in this much of the cover to get people's attention? And so it's tough, but I would love to try different experiments. I don't know what they would do, but just thinking about that billboard effect of the Reese's, I wonder if you could color code your aisles so it was like all the sort of red packages, all the more green packages, and sort of flow it like that, and just see what that would do. People that
are really into books do that on their bookshelves. But just something that would make, because you talked about joy, you talked about fun.
Yes.
Just find another level of that. It's like now everybody lights their shelves, but when that first started, that was a huge deal because that made anything pop.
Yes. And I've seen, because I am very plugged into these nostalgic circles, I've seen people who have large, like, vintage toy collections. I've seen them do color thematic shelves. And it's wild when you see it. Because now it's not a shelf of He-Man or Star Wars or Thundercats or whatever. It's all the green Thundercats, He-Man, and Star Wars figures. And when you see it like that, it captures your eye in such a unique way. So, I mean, look, that's off the cuff. Again, don't hold me to it.
Yeah.
But I think that would be an interesting way to merchandise. Probably incredibly impractical. But it would be fun to see that. And again, just taking that from that one inspiration, because I still remember it to this day when I saw this large Reese's display, and I was just like, oh my God, it really had this strange boom to me because it's just such a unified color scheme. So yeah, that's one.
I guess you could maybe before the big sporting event, whatever it is, the Super Bowl or something like that. One team is red and one team is blue. You set up two different aisles to say who's going to win. Make your choice. So I think there are some things there. So maybe that is the equivalent of legal advice. So
and you see it. Look, I mean, I think one thing that has certainly taken off, and it's helped with social media. You see now in big box stores, they'll do these huge soda or beer displays, and they'll do designs on them. Right? In the olden days, like in the 50s, 60s, you used to see, and I still, because I dig through in my historical things, I'm always finding retail pictures from back then. But they would do like these crazy displays of like canned goods, right? And so that was always the thing. Could you build it? So there was a lot of like this amateur architecture being done with CPG products back then. But I feel like we're coming into a renaissance of that because you see more and more ornate designs and these very complex designs being done with cases of soda and things of that nature. So it's pretty fun to see.
So there's a lot more we can talk about of things over the last. We're not today. We'll have you on another time. But
sure.
We're coming up. Our industry's coming up on its 100th anniversary in 2027.
Yes.
So just talking about how this led to this. This was an idea, test and learn. All of a sudden, everybody's doing it. But you also are, as I mentioned, you're a TV host, and you have these shows, The Food That Built America, the Mega Brands That Built America. So, give a little tease on what those are about if people want to check out those shows.
Yeah.
And what's in the hopper for any future episodes.
The Food That Built America is such a great show. If you're in this industry, I don't know how you can't love it. It focuses on, we tell the stories of America's great brand entrepreneurs. It is about the brands. We talk about the foods that built America, the mega brands that built America, but it really is about the people who were there and built it. And we are an hour-long show. I always say, listen, whenever we get into these stories, there's about 30 threads you can pull on, theoretically. We have space to pull on about 4. But you do start to see, though, I have a friend who works in Hollywood, and he goes, I don't know why a production company just doesn't start stealing every one of your episodes and making like a little, $20 million movie on, because you can, and I still think that's going to happen. Hershey's doing one right now. I had the conversation this morning about that. Anyway. But so that show's about that. It's about that entrepreneurship. It's about those moments in entrepreneurship when you're about to make a decision that's about to change everything for you. And that we cover some of those key moments, and we try to distill these stories down to these big moments. And I always say there's sort of a cliched moment in every episode of The Food That Built America. Like Duncan Hines would one day be known as this baking iconic brand. But first, he had to survive the Depression or whatever. You know? And so there's all these moments like it's gonna be this only if you can get through this.
Yes.
And I think every entrepreneur, every business person goes through those moments where you think, I don't know, this isn't going to work out, but you stick it out and you go through. And the other thing about that particular show is I love to say, as I said, listen, it's almost like I feel like the way you used to bring in like Sesame Street and these educational shows into grade school, I feel like you could wheel our show into an MBA program, because you start to see patterns that are repeated where there's success, where there is failure. I always say it's like before you open up a franchise, just watch like 12 episodes about franchises on The Food That Built America. They will teach you the lessons and the mistakes you don't need to make yourself, you know. Don't expand too fast, folks. It's easy. Don't expand too fast. That's a big one. It's very simple. But so that's a great show. The Mega Brands That Built America is a lot of fun because we have a complete wide berth by which we've talked about the evolution of tires in America, you know, and it sounds so boring. It is so exciting when you get into it and you find and you learn the stories of these people who did these things. And so as entrepreneur, and we're very entrepreneurial these days, we're very brand centric these days. I think these stories are fascinating. And I'm not saying that because I'm on those shows. I love watching the shows. What our producers do in isolating the exciting parts of these stories, it's just great. I think they're very inspirational. And what's satisfying being a part of those shows, why I feel so fortunate, is I will meet brand entrepreneurs that have been inspired, that started their journey because of what they saw on that show. And that, like, I literally stopped getting on a plane to LA and he was like, I just wanted to thank you because this show inspired me to start this brand. I was like, oh my God, this is wild. I'm texting like our producers and like the production company. I was like, I just met this guy who launched this thing. So it's very moving and very humbling. And so I do those things. And then I do another show called Hazardous History with Henry Winkler, the Fonz. And I grew up with Henry Winkler, you know, playing the Fonz and all that stuff. And so we tell stories about the history of crazy, dangerous things we did in the past food-wise, but all manner of things, toys. It's a lot of fun. And I'm adding a fourth show to my repertoire in 2026, hosted by Mike Wolf of American Pickers fame. And we are going to tell stories of history's greatest picks. So we're going to sort of get the greatest weird collectible things found in the past, and we're going to tell those stories, I think with a little reenactment as well. But for me, I'm the guy in the chair helping tell the stories.
So with Henry Winkler, has he done anything about how dangerous it is to jump a shark?
I mean, it's a little inevitable. We did, you know, the funny thing is we did do dangerous stunts. And I don't think we directly alluded to it. We definitely hinted at it. But we talked about, you know, we had Evel Knievel in there. We had the Human Fly. Whoever remembers the Human Fly? Yep. I do. I remember watching the Human Fly on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and my mind being blown because I was a superhero kid.
So anyway,
yes, of
for
course.
kids out there, Google Jump the Shark, how it came up. It had to do with the Fonz actually jumping a shark, which was, if you watch the clip, the shark, there was just a rope around the shark, and that prevented a rope above water. That prevented the shark from going any further, apparently.
Do you know how that scene occurred in the show? Like why that occurred?
So he was trying to do something, I imagine, but I guess he did one take.
Well, here's the deal. Henry Winkler has told the story. Henry Winkler was a really good water skier in real life. And I think it was his father or his mother. It's like, tell Gary Marshall what a good water skier you are. He should know what a good water skier you are. And I think, you know, he would lament and he would tell Gary Marshall what a good water skier he was. And that's one of the reasons why they eventually put that into the show. It's like, well, let's just have Fonzie water ski, you know, which is a very strange turn for the Fonz. But it did birth this great term, which we continue to use today.
So kids, there's a story to look up. And Jason, as you were talking, you use the word storytelling. That's how you connect brands, and that's what makes. Otherwise, it's just a price, and temporary whatever. But then you have the story, and then you have a connection, and then you change a transaction to a customer. So I think there's a lot more stories we can tell together, and we'd love to stay in touch and see how we can tell these stories together.
We're definitely going to do that.
Well, thank you again, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.